Let's start off with the second chapter, Social Institutions, Continuity and Change. Society consists of people who belong to different classes and different communities, and their relationship is sustained and regulated by social institutions. One of the social institutions that we're going to study is the caste and the caste system. Caste is taken from the Portuguese word casta, which means pure breed. In Indian language, caste is synonymous with varna and jati. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the caste system stood for different things in different time periods. Varna means color, and it is the fourfold classification of the society into the Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. This excludes the category of the outcasts, who are referred to as the Panchamas, or the fifth category. The people who belong to the outcasts were the foreigners, slaves, the conquered people, etc. Thing to keep in mind is that caste is a characteristic of the Hindu society. Also remember that the concept of purity and pollution is central to the caste system in India. It has a significant role in shaping the norms, the behavior, and the social interaction within the society. The concept of purity and pollution is rooted in the religious and cultural beliefs of the caste system, and that helps in maintaining the status quo. The Brahmins are considered to be at the top of the hierarchy, and they are associated with religious duties and rituals, and therefore considered the purest of the four categories. Now note that caste is not solely about one's social status. It also has an association to occupational socialization. Now let's define jati. Jati is a generic term that refers to a particular species of kinds of anything. Jati is commonly used for caste by Indians, and there's a difference between Varna and Jati. Varna is like the all India aggregative classification, while Jati is the regional or local subclassification. Post-Vedic period, the caste system became a rigid institution. Now let's move on to the features of the caste system. Commonly defined features of the caste system by Gurye are as follows. Number 1, caste is determined by birth. Number 2, marriage is endogamous. Number 3, what food to eat and share is also defined. Number 4, hierarchical position of the caste. Number 5, castes have subdivisions within themselves, that is segmental organization. 6, castes were traditionally linked to occupations. There were prohibitions of various sorts. Theoretically, the caste system can be understood as the combination of two sets of principles, one based on difference and separation, and the other on holism and hierarchy. That is, each caste is supposed to be different and hence separate from the other. On the other hand, these different and separate castes do not have an individual existence. That is, they only exist in relation to a larger whole, which is a hierarchical system. Also, castes are not only unequal to each other in ritual terms, they're also supposed to be complementary and non-competing groups. Two things that have strongly impacted caste as a social institution are number 1, colonialism, number 2, changes in independent India. In fact, some scholars argue that what we know today as caste is more a product of colonialism than of ancient Indian tradition. Some changes were intended and others were unintended consequences. Initially, the British administrators, in order to efficiently govern the country, began to undertake surveys in order to understand the complexities of the caste system. We have the census conducted by Herbert Risley in the year 1860, and this was done in order to understand the social hierarchy of the caste. Now, this effort, that is the collection of data through the census method, had a huge impact on the social perception of caste. And what we have is a lot of petitions being made by the different caste members to claim a higher position on the social scale. And in order to do that, they were providing scriptural evidence. So, scholars feel that this kind of attempt to directly count caste and to officially record the social status made a huge impact on the caste system itself. The other thing that had an impact on the institution of caste was the land revenue settlement and the related arrangements and laws that served to give legal recognition to the customary caste based right of the upper caste. This transformed the status of the caste members as they became landowners instead of feudal lords. Also, there was a sense of caste dimension in the settlement of population in irrigated areas of Punjab. Towards the end of the colonial period, we have the Government of India Act of 1935 that was passed and gave legal recognition to the lists of castes and tribes that were marked out for special treatment by the state. This is how the terms scheduled tribes and scheduled castes came into existence, including the untouchable castes, which were included amongst the scheduled castes. Now let's look at caste in the present times. First of all, at the time of independence, we have the constitution explicitly mentioning that it was committed to the abolition of the caste. We can trace the roots of this attitude to the nationalist movement that saw it as a ploy of the colonial powers to divide and rule the people. Also, at the time of independence, the state understood that it had to play a major role in removing untouchability through anti-untouchability programs in such a way that the upper castes do not feel that their interest was being sidelined at the expense of the depressed class. The caste status was not important for securing jobs in the government service or for securing jobs in the modern industrial sector. However, in the textile mills of Mumbai and the jute mills of Calcutta, the recruitment to industrial jobs was still based along caste and kinship line. The modern educated Indian had begun to abandon the extreme caste practices, but in certain spheres we find that the caste proved to be the strongest, especially in the institution of marriage and to an extent in the rules regarding food sharing. Caste remains central to electoral politics. Since the 1980s, there has been an emergence of caste-based political parties. So these were some of the changes. Now when we talk about changes, to keep in mind two terms, Sanskritization and dominant caste. These two terms were put forth by M.N. Srinivas. What is Sanskritization? It's a process whereby members of the middle or lower caste attempt to raise their own social status by adopting the ritual, domestic, and social practices of a caste that is of a higher status than them. That is, by becoming a vegetarian or wearing a sacred thread or taking part in specific religious ceremonies or engaging in prayers and so on. Sanskritization is usually accompanied by a rise in the economic status of the caste that is attempting it, although it can also occur independently. Dominant caste is a term used to refer to those castes which had a large population and were granted land rights by the partial land reforms effected after independence. The examples are the Jats of Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP, and the Yadavs of Bihar and UP. One of the paradoxical change in the caste system in the contemporary period is that it became invisible for the upper caste. It seems that it played no part in their public lives. It became limited for them to their personal sphere of religious practice, marriage, and kinship. However, for the SCs and STs and OBCs, the opposite has happened. Caste has become all too visible and it has eclipsed all other dimensions of their identity, as the reason being that they have no inherited educational and social capital and they are competing with the already firmly placed upper caste group. So, the reason is that they have learned to hold on to their caste identity and use it as a prop in the social sphere. Now we move on to tribal communities. Well, first of all, let's understand that the word tribal is a modern term that was used in the colonial era for administrative convenience. The modern term for old communities is tribals, and they are the oldest inhabitants of the subcontinent. When we are defining the tribals, let's understand that they've always been defined by what they are not. That is, they do not have a written text, they do not practice a religion as in an oral or written form, they do not have any sharp class division, they do not belong to any caste, they are not Hindus, nor are they peasants. So we know that tribals have a kinship based social organization, they are animist, and they have an egalitarian structure. Now we move on to their classification, and we find that tribals are classified according to two traits, that is, the permanent trait and second, the acquired trait. Under the permanent trait, we look at the region, that is, that although the tribal population is widely dispersed, but they are also concentrated in certain regions. That is, about 85% of the tribal population lives in Middle India and 11% in the northeastern states, with 3% living in the rest of India. Now, secondly, the language that the tribals speak. Well, there are four languages, that is the Indo-Aryan, the Dravidian, the Austric, and the Tibeto-Burman. Third, the classification is based on their physical racial terms. That is, the tribals are classified under Negrito, Australoid, Mongoloid, Dravidian, and Aryan categories. That is, 5 categories. And finally, we look at the ecological habitat. That is, tribals prefer to live in hilly areas or forests, or they are located in the rural plains and are also living in urban industrial areas. Now we move on to the acquired trait, and when we're looking at the acquired trait, we're looking at two things. One, their mode of livelihood, and second, the extent of incorporation into the Hindu society through the process of Sanskritization or assimilation and acculturation. Acculturation is the adoption of a behavior pattern of the culture, and assimilation is the complete giving up of one's own culture. So now let's look at what has been the mainstream attitude towards them. One group looks at tribals as people in need for protection from traders, from money lenders, and from the Hindu or Christian missionaries. The second group looks at the need for them to be integrated into the mainstream society. Why? Because they are viewed as backward Hindus and they can be integrated into the fold. The second thing to understand is that since the tribals do not have any concept of ownership of land, they have been losing their land either to the government policies of reservation or in the development for mining activities, their land has been taken away from them. So, in this comes the question of national development versus tribal development. The tribals have been traditionally living in forested areas or areas which are mineral rich. Now, tribals don't have the concept of property ownership, they have community ownership. The net result has been that in the name of development, they have paid a disproportionate price in the sense that they have been made to give up their land in the name of development. And what has happened to their land? Well, that land has been used for setting up factories, for building dams, and for mining activities. The tribal people, as a net result, have been forced to relocate, and we have heavy in migration of non-tribal people who have taken up their land due to developmental activities. So, what is tribal identity in today's time? One is the creation of states, that is, on the political front, we have the creation of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh. Now, secondly, on the economic and cultural front, we find that education has helped improve the condition of the tribals, and there's this emergence of the new educated middle class people who have helped to bring about a resurgence and revival of the tribal culture. Now, when we look at the tribals, we see that their tribal identity has a basis of being related to resistance against the non tribal world. Modern tribals are proud bearers of their cultural identity. Some examples would be Mary Kom, the boxing champion, Baichung Bhutia, the footballer, Nanjiama from Herdswoman to National Award winner for Best Playback Singer in Malayalam movie, Duty Chand in track and field, just to name a few tribal icons. The other institution that we're going to look at is the institution of family. How would you define a family? Well, a family is a group of persons who are united by ties of either marriage, blood, or adoption. Now, family is a social institution, and if we look at the structure of the institution of family, we can categorize it into either nuclear family or extended family. What is a nuclear family? Well, a nuclear family consists of a unit having parents and their offspring, while an extended family would have that unit plus grandparents or any other relative living with them. The second categorization is on the basis of who is heading the family. If we are looking at who wields the power in the family or who is heading the family, then we have the division into patriarchy and matriarchy. That is, in patriarchy, the power is wielded by the male member of the family. Finally, the third classification is on the basis of tracing the descent. If the line of descent is traced from a female ancestor, then we term it as matrilineal, and vice versa, it would be patrilineal if it is traced from a male ancestor. Now, the important thing to note is that there have been matrilineal societies, but matriarchy is a theoretical concept. There hasn't been any historical or anthropological evidence of matriarchy. One important thing to understand is that the internal structure of the family is usually related to the structure of the society, that is, the political, economic, and cultural aspect. How you might wonder, say, for example, if there's a war, then there would be an increase in the number of working women. Also, if there are more women working, we find the grandparents are going to pitch in to help the family unit. With individuals wanting to take up choices, we will find that the spouse choice and same sex union is also a change in the family structure. Single parent families are also on the rise due to female economic empowerment. So let us look at the recent changes in the family structure. Well, first of all, we find that the size of the family is becoming smaller. That is, there has been a decline in the number of children. Secondly, both parents are working, and there seems to be a kind of clear-cut division of household responsibilities between the male and female parent. Third, single parent families are also on the rise. It might be either due to divorce or some other reason. And because the women are also economically empowered, so it becomes feasible for the women to also be heads of a single parent family. The next thing that we find is the growing individualism, which has resulted in a kind of independent minded attitude amongst the children and their desire to take up decisions independently. Now, the last thing that we're going to look at is the matrilineal system prevalent in the Kasi society. First of all, note that will making does not exist in the Kasi society. Now, the tribes of Meghalaya, specifically the Kasi and the Jaintia, in them the inheritance passes from the mother to the daughter, while the control passes from the uncle, that is the mama, to the nephew or the bhanja. So, in both the cases, we find that there is a role conflict. That is, from the point of view from the male side, he has a role conflict between his responsibility to the natal house and to his wife and children. While on the female side, she is not fully assured that her husband is going to find her sister's house more pleasant than her own house. Note that women possess only token authority. So we look at the last point, that is the Meghalaya Succession Act of 1986, and this act specifically applies to the Khasi and Jaintia tribes of Meghalaya, and it gives the right to these people to dispose of their self-acquired property by will. Why? Like I said at the beginning, that these people do not have the practice of making out a will, and the Kasi custom provides the devolution of ancestral property in the female line. And with this, we conclude this chapter.